In this lesson, I'm going to talk about and create our first PHP program. So we have the Atom editor open, and of course you can use any other editors like Sublime or Brackets and so on. But since we've been using Atom for the rest of the course for our e-commerce site and so on, so I'm going to use the same editor so everything is in line. So once you have, let's say, the blank or just the Atom editor open, here I have a folder called Intro, and of course there's nothing inside the folder, and this folder comes from obviously from XAMPP install folder, htdocs, tutorial, and then the intro. So if you don't have this intro, you just create a folder, make sure it's within the tutorial folder. And it's important because once you display the output of your PHP program, for instance, or anything that you write within the Atom editor, it needs to be output to the web browser. So make sure your XAMPP is running, and then let me just verify on my own end. Perfect. So here's the tutorial intro, and here's the URL, right? So my local web server, tutorials folder, and then I created a folder called intro. So anything that I place within this folder, any files like abc.php, xyz.php file, any file, I should be able to see the output on this web page. Perfect. So let's get back to our editor. So within this intro folder, I'm going to go ahead and just simply right click and click on new file, and I'm going to call it first PHP program.php. And here's the name of the file that I just created, and of course it tells me that this file is stored within the intro folder. Of course it's blank. So let's go ahead, and first I'm going to start with the basic HTML tags, and again you've seen this in previous lessons. So let's start with the HTML, and the good thing about these editors is that they give you visuals as to what it is that you really want to do. So since I just opened the HTML tag, right, it shows me HTML, and if I hit enter, for example, or close the tag, it automatically closes the end tag as well for me. And this is good because I don't have to forget. Sometimes if I'm writing large code, it would do it automatically for me, so I don't have to think about whether I close the HTML tag or not, or the heading 1 tag or not, and so on. So within the HTML tag, I'm going to go ahead and tab or indent, and then use the head tag as well. And just like before, once I close the head tag, it automatically closes the head tag as well. So within my head tag, I'm going to go ahead and let's say I need a title or a heading 1, for example, right, or H1. And then H1 is going to be something like hello world, of course the famous hello world. This is my first PHP page. Now notice at this point I'm not even using any PHP, right? It's just standard HTML, basic HTML tags, which is fine. And this blue dot that you see next to the PHP program means that you have not saved the changes yet. So if you were to use your keyboard, Control S to save, straightforward, it'll save the file. So after I'm done with my simple H1 tag, I'm going to close the head tag, which is fine, and then I'm going to start my body. So here I'm going to go ahead and say and open the body tag, and then within the body tag is what's important, is what our PHP will come out. Okay, so right here is where I'm going to now create a simple PHP. So let's open a tag. It works very similar to HTML, and in PHP, after I open the tag, I need to use the question mark. As soon as I do this, notice the Atom editor recognizes that now I'm writing or doing something with PHP. So it's question mark PHP, and then if I use a space, right, next I need to do echo, and echo is for print, by the way. So if you've taken some other languages like Python or Java, for example, they use the word print. Well, PHP uses the word echo, right? So very similar, but just different words because it's a different language. So I'm going to simply do a print, and what am I printing? In quotations, which is a string, and hello world. This is again my first PHP program. Now this is being repeated, right? So I use this for the h1 tag above, and then of course I'm using the PHP tags here as well. Now once I'm done with the string part, I need to use the semicolon. So the syntax is important, right? So we use this semicolon whenever we write the PHP or open the PHP tag. So after the semicolon, I need to close the tag. So of course, closing is the same as opening, so question mark and then the greater than sign. So notice here we're using the question mark greater than, and then of course we're using the less than greater than or less than question mark to open the PHP tag. Very similar to HTML, right? So we open the tag and we close the HTML tag with the /. Here we use the question mark. So that's the only difference. And of course the semicolon is also, that is part of the PHP. So just remember this, anytime you want to use PHP, this is the syntax. You have to open the PHP tag and it has to close with the question mark and then greater than sign. And within the PHP tag, of course, we can do lots of things, but for right now, just a basic HTML program. So I'm going to go ahead and simply save this. So Control S on my keyboard, and let's navigate to my web browser. So at this point, I'm in the intro folder. Let me refresh and I should be able to see the first PHP program.php. If I click on it, perfect. So here I see hello world. This is my first PHP page. And then of course it's repeated again, hello world. This is again my first PHP program. And this comes from the HTML tags, and this comes from the PHP tags. So here's the visible difference, right? So let's go back to our editor. Now what happens, for instance, if I were to, let's say, remove the HTML part? So just remove everything that's HTML, right? Just have this one basic code of PHP. Let's go ahead and save this. So all I have is simply just the PHP line. If I were to run this now, after I save this, let's navigate back to our browser, refresh, and perfect. We just see the PHP output, which is hello world. This is again my first PHP program. And this is of course minus the HTML part. So you can see and balance out how HTML and then of course CSS as well, you can style the page and so on, works with PHP. So let's get back to our code. And I'm just going to go ahead and undo it. I just wanted to demonstrate that it's easier to see that you can just use without PHP. So I'm just going to undo this and then save it. Perfect. So in this lesson, I simply demonstrated the PHP tag and then creating your first PHP program. So practice with this and let's move to the next lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate and talk about PHP variables. Important concept. We know what variables are. They store data, piece of information, right? So how does it fit into the PHP world? So here I'm going to demonstrate by writing a simple program using PHP so you understand what this program does, how variables work in PHP. So let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new file. So within my intro folder, we earlier created the first PHP program.php. Here I'm just going to right click on the same folder, click on new file, so everything stays within the same htdocs tutorial and intro folder. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to go ahead and call it variable, or PHP variable rather, and then .php. Now it's important to note that you must also enter the extension, otherwise the editor is not going to recognize this. Okay, so hit the enter key, and here we have the PHP variable.php, a blank file. So recall from the previous lesson, first things first, we need to open the PHP tag, And we do this by the less than sign, question mark, and then just typing PHP. That's all there is to it. And of course there's a closing tag to this as well. But for right now, after PHP, I'm going to hit enter, and by default automatically the Atom editor also inserts the closing tag. So let's enter some spaces. So anything between these tags, right, is PHP code. So let's go ahead and create a variable. So a variable is something that stores a piece of information or some data. Now in PHP, a certain syntax is used to store variable, and that is using the string or the $sign. So we use the $sign and then name of the variable. Now certain naming conventions must be followed when you create names for your variables. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and create a variable starting with a string. That's my syntax, and I'm going to call it New York. So that's just my variable. And this equals, right, the variable has to store some information. So this statement or this variable New York equals, and then my string has to be in quotations, and I'm going to go ahead and say I love Big Apple. Just the name, another name for New York. Okay. So, and of course, one thing that we must also recall as part of the PHP syntax is we need the semicolon. Okay, it's important. So every time you write a statement, you need to create a semicolon. This basically tells that you need to go to the next line. Okay, so think of this as a period or a full stop or something like that, so it goes to the next line or next statement. So once I've defined the variable called New York, I love Big Apple, next I can also define a variable such as $sign, and I can have something like ABC, for example, equals, and then this could be the integer type. So if I create a value for the variable ABC as integer, this does not have to be in strings. Okay, in other words, in quotations, for example. So that's not the case. For integer, it's just a number. So for example, this could be 76 as the integer, and of course the semicolon. So once I create this, let me go ahead and create another one. So string, and this I'm going to say XYZ, just a name. And this could contain, let's say, a float number. So it'll be something like 10.9, for example, semicolon. And then my PHP tag is closed. So all I've done here is simply created these variables. So let me go ahead and save this. So Control S. Now there's some, as I mentioned earlier, naming conventions of using these variables. In other words, I could use New York, I could use ABC, XYZ, and any other names, but there are certain rules. And over time, as you write more code in PHP, you'll get experienced and you will memorize these rules. But I have these rules written down so we can go through them one at a time. So let me just move this aside here in the center. Perfect. So here are the rules for the PHP that we must follow. The variable starts with the $sign followed by the name of the variable. So that's rule number 1, which we followed. Rule number 2, a variable name must start with a letter or the underscore character. Rule number 3, a variable name cannot start with a number. Rule number 4, a variable name can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores. So you can have something like A through Z, 0 to 9, and underscore. Variable names are case sensitive. So if I were to use $age as being lowercase and $age as being uppercase are two different variables, even though they spell the same way. They're both age in spelling, but they're different variables just by changing the lowercase to uppercase. So just basic rules, and as you write more programs, they'll come natural to you. So for example, if I were to, let's say, go to New York and enter the underscore, that's a valid variable name. Similarly, I can work with ABC, I can do XYZ, and so on, right? So you get the idea. So make sure you keep these rules in mind when working with PHP. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and save this program. let's execute this and see what happens. So I'm going to navigate back to my web browser. So once I'm in my browser, I'm going to go ahead and just go back here to my actual folder called the intro folder here and refresh, and I should be able to see the PHP variable.php file that we just created. If I were to click on this, obviously it's blank because nothing happens. And so far I've only done or declared the variables, but I did not recall the print or the echo, right? So therefore the page stays empty. So I just wanted to demonstrate this, that just by declaring variables, nothing's going to happen until and unless you actually do the print statement as well. So let's navigate back to our code. So in this lesson, just wanted to demonstrate the basic concept of PHP variables and some of the rules. So practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Moving forward, in this lesson, I will talk about what a PHP function is and how does it work. So let's jump right in. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. Right click on the intro folder, choose new file, and give it a name. I'm going to go ahead and call it my function.php. Hit the enter key on the keyboard, and of course it creates a new file. So first things first, open the PHP tag, less than sign, question mark, PHP, and of course it automatically places the end tag as well. So let's enter some lines here so we can start writing our code. Let me first go ahead and show you something called writing a comment, right? So whenever you like to, let's say, write a comment in your code, we start with the / and then the asterisk. Okay, notice how it changes the color, right? So / as soon as I use the asterisk sign, it changes the color. So the editor tells me that now this is going to be a comment. So I'm going to go ahead and say defining our first PHP function. And then once I'm done, I need to use the asterisk again and then the / again. So this is how you would in fact write comments within your code. And what are comments? These are simply statements or text that does not affect your code at all. So it's just like giving a title or a heading in plain English language so that whoever is looking at your code, they know exactly what you're doing within this particular block of code or these lines of code. So straightforward comments, nothing fancy. So it's a good idea to use comments, by the way. Every time you write code, it's a good idea to use comments so that you can actually remember yourself and for other users as well, or other developers or programmers who take a look at your code so they can understand the logic. So I just placed a comment called defining our first PHP function. So let's go ahead, and the function is what I use, and notice it changes the color in purple, right? So that's the syntax for creating a function. So you just type function space and then provide a name of the function. So I'm going to go ahead and call it my first function, and the syntax is a set of parentheses, and once again it changes color to blue. So as soon as a set of parentheses, PHP knows that it's a function. Now before I move forward, what really is a function? So PHP functions are similar to, let's say, other programming languages. A function is a piece of code which takes one or more input in the form of a parameter and does some processing and then returns a value. So think of this as like a box that contains certain things, right? Like a few pieces of Lego, and you just fit those pieces together and you give it a sequence, right? So just a small package, so to speak, think of that, of a function, what it does. So within the function, for example, I can have parameters, which I'm going to demonstrate in the next lesson, but within these set of parentheses, I can also have additional parameters. But here, just a basic function with no parameters. So that's what the function in PHP does. It's just a code which takes more than one input in the form of parameter and does some processing and returns a value. And we've seen functions, maybe you might have seen functions in other programming languages and so on. And in PHP, just plain and simple, easy to create a function. So here we just created a function called myFirstFunction with a set of parentheses, and then we open the curly braces, something new. So the curly braces, you need to note that while creating a function, its name should start with the keyword function, which is in purple, right? So that's called a keyword. These are built-in keywords that we must use. Once we use the built-in keyword, it has to start with that. And all of the PHP code should be put inside the curly braces. And that's important. So this is just the basic syntax whenever you use a function. So I just created a curly braces, and if I hit enter, so everything that goes from the first curly braces, starting at this point and where I end my curly braces, everything in between will be part of the function. And of course, the entire function is part of the PHP tags. So that's how it works. So once I open the curly braces, then I'm going to go ahead and write something within the curly braces, right? So here I'm going to go ahead and simply do a printout, echo, and then quotations. I'm going to say PHP is an easy yet powerful language. Make sure my spellings are correct. Perfect. So, and of course, one thing's missing, right? The semicolon. You must have that. And then I'm going to go ahead and close the curly braces. So this function contains just a simple print statement. Now we're not done yet. Once you define a function, we need to call a function as well. And what do I mean by calling a function? That means you've told the box, right, the elements within the box to be in certain order to do something, and then you have to call out to that box. In other words, tell the box to run, tell the box to do something, or whichever the contents of that box are, they need to be activated, right? So that's called basically calling a function. So to call a function, it's just straightforward. Let me first place a comment one more time. So it's /*. Here's how you would call a function. So once I'm done with this comment, use the asterisk and then of course the slash again. Perfect. And then in order to call a function, what do? You simply just type the name of the function again with a semicolon. That's all. So here the name is myFirstFunction, set of parentheses, and then semicolon. So here I'm going to go ahead and fix up my comment because I need a space here. Perfect. So that we remain consistent. And once I'm done with this, just bring up my PHP tag. So once I have this my first function and I called this function, right, I'm going to go ahead and save it, and then let's go ahead and execute this. So I'm going to go back to my browser here, just refresh so that all contents within the intro folder are current, and here's my function.php. If I were to click on it, notice it says PHP is an easy yet powerful language. So let's navigate back to our code. So here, notice all I did was print it out, right? That's all I did. Now, of course, here I'm strictly showing you PHP. If you need to use HTML, for example, and add titles or CSS, you're more than welcome to do so. And I demonstrated this in one of the earlier lessons. But I'm strictly focusing and just on pure PHP code. So here in this lesson, we talked about what a function is and how to define the function and call a function. So I hope this helps. Practice, and let's move to the next lesson. In this lesson, moving forward, I'll demonstrate how to write functions that contain parameters. In the previous lesson, we talked about just defining a function. Here, a step forward where a function can contain certain parameters. So let's jump right in. let me go ahead and right click on the intro folder, create a new PHP file, choose new file, just give it any name you like, and I'm going to call it function with parameter or param.php. Hit the enter key, and perfect. Let's go ahead and start. Now, of course, so far I've been demonstrating just the pure PHP code, and of course you can always embed within HTML the head tags and so on. So here I'm just going to go ahead and start with the HTML, just so that you can actually see both ways, right? Just pure PHP, and of course within HTML tags as well. So next I'm going to go ahead and open the head tag. This is good practice, by the way, if you were to do this. So I need my head tag, and then of course within my head I like to have a heading or title or whichever. So I'm just going to go ahead and do H1, and then within my H1 I'm going to have something like writing, or this lesson is about functions with, or functions that contain parameters. Great. And once I'm done with this, I'm just going to close the head tag, and then I'm going to go ahead and open the body tag. So within my body tag I would need the PHP. Great. So here I'm going to open the PHP tag, the question mark PHP. That's how it starts. And then of course as I enter, the editor automatically closes the PHP tag as well, which is fine. So just enter a few spaces so everything remains within the PHP tag. So here I'm going to go ahead and create a function. So just a function, and give it a name, and this function's name is, let's say, simple addition function. Now you want to keep these function names very similar, and of course follow certain convention, right? But here in my example I'm just writing it out, spelling it out, so it's easier for you to actually understand what we're actually doing. So we're creating a function, and the name of the function is simple addition function. Open the parentheses, and within the parentheses is where the parameters go. Now if I don't have any parameters, it is still fine, it's a valid function. But this function contains, let's say, certain parameters, and these parameters are string, and then let's say the name, which is number 1, for example. And recall, the string number 1 is basically the variable, right? And then the other parameter is string number 2. And of course you can have, by placing a comma, you can have others as well. So once we define the parameters within the function, the syntax says that we need to open the curly braces, enter a few lines, and next I'm going to go ahead and specify another variable called total, and this is going to equal, of course, the parameters. So we get the output once it adds the numbers together. So it'll be number 1, and then simple plus sign, right? And then string number 2. Great. Semicolon, that's important. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the printout, because we need to tell the PHP program that we need the actual print, right? So it'll be echo, and within the quotations I'm going to go ahead and do sum of the two numbers is, and then colon, and of course I don't know what the numbers are yet, right? So I'm going to go ahead and simply use the string total variable, and that's what it is going to print. So here, since I've specified the total variable, the output when the print occurs on the web page, right? So it's going to say text which says sum of the two numbers is, and then whatever the total is for number 1 plus number 2. And I also need a semicolon as part of the syntax. And I'm going to go ahead and close the curly braces, which is fine. And next I'm going to call the function, right? So calling the function means just the name of the function again. So it'll be simple addition function, and it automatically pops up. My editor is smart enough to tell me that I've already used this name before, so it provides a list, and I hit enter and it just writes it for me. So here the parameters are the numbers, right? Because I need to provide some numbers, otherwise it would not know what to add, because so far I've not actually or written any numbers. So when I call the function is when I'm telling the function to run the set of numbers. So here, for example, my first number is going to be 200, comma, and then the next one is going to be, let's say, 500. And of course I must need an enter or write the semicolon. So after the semicolon, close my PHP tag, and of course my body tag is closed, and then my HTML tag is also closed. Make sure I have some spaces and do some indentation so it stays in order. Perfect. So here's a simple program demonstrating functions that contain parameters. So let's save this. Let's go ahead and execute this. Navigate to our browser. Once I'm in my browser, I'm going to go ahead and refresh. So here's the name, function with param.php. Let me go ahead and click on it, and perfect. So it gives me the h1 tag, which is, this lesson is about functions that contain parameters, and then the output. Sum of the two numbers is 700. Perfect. So it adds the two numbers together and displays the total for me. So when I navigate back to my code, here are the two numbers, 200 and 500. If I add them together, it's 700, and that's what I get when I display the output on the web page. So a simple concept, but very important. Understand functions and understand functions that contain parameters. Practice. Let's move to the next lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate the PHP objects. Now within PHP, an object must be explicitly declared. So first, we must declare a class of the object, and for this we use the class keyword simply. A class is simply a structure that can contain various properties and methods. So let's go ahead and let me quickly demonstrate the important concept of using the PHP objects, because we'll be using this throughout the latter part of the course as well. So let's go ahead and let me right click on the intro folder, choose new file, and give it a name. I'm going to call it PHP Object.php. Enter. And of course start with my PHP tag, less than sign, question mark, PHP. Enter. Few spaces, few lines, and make sure you have the ending tag here as well. Okay, so if it's not there, you make sure you enter the ending tag, otherwise your code is not going to run. So everything that's within these PHP opening and closing tag is what matters. So here I'm going to go ahead and simply create a class, and the class is going to be called, let's say, city. Open the curly braces. Now within the curly braces I need my function, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do function called city. Open the curly braces again, because one curly braces is for the class itself, and then the other one is for the function. And within the function I'm going to go ahead and do my variable, so it'll be string, and say something like this, and then use the dash and then the greater than sign. I'm going to go ahead and say county equals string quotations and then maybe Franklin, semicolon, close my two curly braces, one for the class, the other one for the function. Great. So once I have the class and of course the function, next I'm going to go ahead and create an object. So let's go ahead and first let me put a comment here. So creating the object, and then use the asterisk again to end the comment. So my object here is going to be, let's say, string or $ my city, and this my city is going to equal new city, and this is again the same as the name of the function, right? So this is new city with a semicolon. So once I have the new city here, I can also show the or create the object properties. So I'm going to go ahead and first place a quick comment here so you actually know. So show object properties, and then of course close my comment. Simply do the echo, and then in this instance I'm going to echo out the string and then my city and then the actual county. Perfect. Semicolon. Great. Close my PHP tag, which is already there. So here a simple example of creating an object in PHP. Let me go ahead and save this. Once it's saved, I'm going to navigate to my browser and just to test it out. So let's go ahead, open up our browser, refresh the intro folder, and then the name is called PHP Object.php. Here it is. Click on it, and perfect. It gives me the output. It says Franklin County. So let's go back to our code, and here's our Franklin County. And that's exactly what we echoed out or we wanted to print. So in this lesson, just wanted to demonstrate the concept of PHP objects. So hope this helps practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. Moving forward in this lesson, I'm going to talk about different types of operators that are used in PHP. So by operators, I mean logical, arithmetic, string, and so on. So I'm going to talk about all of these operators, and I'll also provide the resource guide for you to actually take a look at the list of complete PHP operators or operators that you can use within PHP code. And I'm also going to demonstrate a few of them just so that you can actually see the output and the results. And I'll demonstrate the important ones so that later on in the course when we use those, we'll have an idea of what they actually do. So let's jump right in. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and create a new PHP file. So right click on the intro, new file, and just give it a name. So I'm going to call it operators.php. Enter, and perfect. Now before I actually demonstrate a few of these operators, let's first take a look at what they are and what do they look like. So let's bring up my resource document here. So here's the list of all of the operators. It's about a 5-page document. I'm quickly going to run through it, and then of course I'll provide this so you can download it and then take a look at it. So the first category is the arithmetic operators, and these are pretty straightforward. So for example, you have the plus sign, adds two integers together. So for example, a plus b will give you 30, right? We have the minus sign, we have the multiplication sign, the division, and then of course the modulus operator and remainder of after an integer division. Something very common that we use is the percent symbol. It's called the modulus operator. We also have the increments and decrement. The two plus signs, two minus signs are simply increasing the integer value by 1 or decreasing the integer value by 1. Let's scroll down. The next category are the comparison operators. So for instance, you may have an operator that looks like two equal signs. So in fact, this will check if the value of the two operands are equal or not. And if yes, then condition becomes true. So in typical mathematics, we just write one single equal sign. But in programming languages such as PHP or even Java and other programming languages, we use the two equal signs that essentially means or implies equality. Next is the exclamation mark and the equal sign, this will check if the value of the two operands are equal or not. And if values are not equal, then the condition will become true. So this is also known as like not equal to. Of course, greater than, less than, greater than equal to, less than equal to, straightforward, right? I'm just scrolling down. Next category is the logical operators. For instance, and, or. And the important one here I want to highlight is this one. It's called the logical AND operator. If both the operands are non-zero, then only the condition becomes true. So if A and B is true, it will display the results. Then we have the two straight lines, right? Something called the logical OR operator. If any of the two operands are non-zero, then the condition becomes true. And a simple exclamation mark is called logical NOT operator. So just go through this document, take a look at some of the important ones, and let me show you a couple of more assignment operators. We've been using the equal sign, right? For example, we create a variable and then we assign a value to the variable, such as C equals A plus B. So equal means a simple assignment statement. Then we have the plus equal sign, minus equal sign, multiplication equals, division equal. And as I scroll down, I have the modulus equal as well. The conditional operator first evaluates an expression for a true or false value and then executes one of the two given statements depending upon the result of the evaluation. So this is important, something that we'll be using quite a bit in our course. So the question mark and then the colon, which is the conditional expression. So if the condition is true, then value X colon, otherwise value true. And string operator, something that we'll also use quite a bit in this course, is just a dot. So this will concatenate or join two variables together, right? So for example, txt1 dot txt2 is simply concatenating these two variables. So just go through the document once again so you can actually take a look at all of these types of operators. And I've only highlighted the important ones. Next, I'm going to demonstrate a few of them. So let's navigate back to our Atom editor. So once I'm in the Atom editor, I'm going to go ahead and simply write two programs. I'm going to demonstrate two of them, the important ones, and then you can practice with the rest of them. So here, first one is, let's say start with the PHP tag. So I'm going to go ahead and do PHP, enter a few lines. Simple two variables. So string, for example, ABC equals, let's say, 500, semicolon. And then another variable, XYZ. Of course, I need to start with a string, equals, let's say, 200, semicolon. And here, I'm just going to go ahead and check for a condition. So the if statement that I'll later get into in detail what an if statement is, but it's just if then else, right? A logical condition. So if, parentheses, my first variable, which is ABC, equals, right? So equals, recall, is the equality. 500, for instance, and with the two signs, string XYZ equals 200, open the curly braces, and here I'm going to go ahead and do the printout. So echo, and then just the printout. So something like New York, New York, a couple of times. Semicolon, of course, close my curly braces, and then my PHP tag is closed. So here's an example of the equality, and then of course the logical AND. So let me go ahead and save this, Control S on my keyboard. Let's navigate to my browser. So once I'm in my browser, I'm going to refresh, and the operators.php file is here now. Click on it, and perfect. So it displays the output, New York, New York. Let's navigate back to our code. Great. So here's an example, right, of a simple couple of different types of operators. Let me quickly demonstrate another one. So let's go ahead and create a new file, in fact, so it's easier, keep things separate. New file. I'm going to call it operators2.php. And in this instance, another example, just start with the PHP. And of course, as a practice task, by the way, just write all of these operators. Write simple programs for all of the operators, so you actually get to not only practice with the PHP tag and the assignment statements, but also all these operators. And the more you do it, the easier it'll become for you once we get into our e-commerce and shopping cart functionality. So it's question mark PHP, open the tag, automatically closes it. And again, the two variables, this time it's going to be car equals, and I'm going to use string in this instance. And I'm going to say Honda, for example, semicolon. And then next is my bike equals, and this is going to be my bike Ducati. So place a semicolon and then simply do the echo just to print out, simple, just so you can see. And here I'm going to demonstrate the concatenation, how I can actually take both of these variables. First one is the car, and then dot. The next one is the bike, semicolon, and then close my PHP tag. So let's see what happens. Let me save this operators2 file, navigate back to my browser here. Let's go back, refresh, and here's the operators2, and perfect. So it says Honda and then Ducati. So this way you can practice with all of these operators. Let's navigate back to our code. Perfect. So I demonstrated a few of these important operators. So as a practice task, go ahead and create several programs by using multiple types of operators. With this, let's move to the next lesson. In this lesson, I want to talk about the concept of array in PHP. So what is an array and why do we really use them? So think of an array as a special variable which can hold more than one value at a time. So for example, if we have a list of items, a list of car names, for example, we can store the car names in single variables. Could look like, for example, you have to define each variable name for each type of car. Whereas an array function can be used to create the actual array, which can contain multiple elements. So why do we really use them, and what's the benefit of using the array? So think of this in terms of going to your local DVD store, right? They have thousands and thousands of DVDs, and they're very organized. In other words, you can pick a DVD section, you can go to a certain aisle, work through a section, and then pick an alphabet or multiple alphabets and then navigate to those particular DVDs. In other words, everything is indexed, right? Like a directory. So you have chapters, you have subchapters, and so on. And all of this is done very quickly, and it seems like magic, right? To get the special or the specific DVD from the huge collection so quickly. So basically, we're keeping the similar DVDs in the same shelf. We're labeling each category by its name, labeling rows in DVDs, and then assigning IDs to all DVDs. So in programming, same concept applies. Sometimes we have to handle with different related values which are bound together in different ways. So for example, names of top 5 students, the models of Porsche cars, variables, submitted form, a form, and so on. And in all of these conditions, what you need is you would need to organize the code and the logic to handle similar types of data more efficiently and quickly. similar to the DVD logic, right? We can organize data into different bounded together categories. We can label the rows, we can assign unique IDs to each of those data values. So that's why we actually use the array. So next I'm going to demonstrate by creating a simple array using PHP. So let's go ahead within our Atom editor. I'm going to right click on the intro folder, create a new file, and I'm going to give this a name, call it array.php, and then begin our code. So lesson sign, question mark, that's the opening of the PHP tag, and make sure I have the end tag available. Now within my PHP tag, I'm going to go ahead and simply create a variable. So let's say string city, or cities rather. I may have multiple in them. And this is going to equal the array function. So instead of using just the empty array or null array, right, I'm going to add some values to it. So the first element within this array is going to be, let's say, New York, and then comma. The next one is going to be Chicago, and then of course comma again, Boston, and then maybe one more, Miami, and so on. So once I'm done with just creating the simple array, put a semicolon, and then of course do the printout. Okay, so let's go ahead and do echo, and then I like, for example, and here I'm going to go ahead and concatenate, right? Remember the dot? We use this to concatenate the string cities, and then within the brackets I specify the first array or the first element within my array. So for example, notice by looking at it, I know that New York is the first element in this array. Now how are these numbered? Here when I print these out, I need to specify, for example, 0 as my first number of the array. So PHP thinks that when I use 0, it's going to associate the 0 with New York, and then guess what? 1 is Chicago, 2 is Boston, and 3 is Miami. That's how it works. The first number associated with the element of the first element in the array is always 0. It's very important. Just remember that. Okay, so you always start with 0, not with 1. So 0 will associate to New York, and then I'm going to go ahead and let's say concatenate again, place a comma, concatenate with the cities again, and this time I'm going to use 1 dot and just type and. Could be any text within the set of quotations because it's just string, and then dot again, and then string cities, use 2, and so on. Okay, so I'm just going to pick 3 of these, right? So 0, 1, and 2. Of course, that'll be New York, Chicago, and Boston. And let's go ahead and do Miami anyways. So let's go back here, put a comma here, and then after the dot cities, just repeat the same step again. So this will be and, for instance, make some spaces, dot, and then cities, and then of course 3. It's actually easier so you can follow better. So once I'm done with this, just put a semicolon, for example, and then our PHP tag closes. So a simple concept of a simple array with concatenation, so you can actually see how the array and the output works. So let's save this, Control S on my keyboard, and then navigate to my browser, refresh. Here's the array.php. Let me go ahead and click on it, and perfect. So I like New York, comma Chicago, comma Boston, and Miami. So this way you understand the concept of a simple array function. So I hope this helps. Practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome to this lesson on Introduction to SQL using PHP. Since we're developing the e-commerce site with full cart functionality, the backend database is required, right? So understanding and having a good grasp on some of the basic SQL statements, for example, is necessary. So moving forward within this section, I'm going to demonstrate various SQL commands and how to connect to our backend database using PHP, so that when we actually get to the core code of cart functionality, things will be a lot easier and they'll make sense. So here I'm just going to introduce to you the concept of SQL, the difference between SQL and MySQL, and then I'll also demonstrate how to connect to our backend database using SQL with PHP. The difference between SQL versus MySQL. You might have heard both of these terms. So SQL is structured query language. That's what this means. It's a standard language for accessing and manipulating your databases. So whether you're running an Oracle database, SQL Server, or any other types of databases, you will need SQL, which is a structured query language, to access information, manipulate data, add to the data, and so on. MySQL, on the other hand, is a database management system like SQL Server, Oracle, Informix, Postgres, etc. So we know the basic difference, right? The MySQL is also a relational database management system, also known as the RDMS. So just to give you an idea of the basic difference between SQL and MySQL, because these terms are used interchangeably, right? So let's not confuse them later on, so you understand that we're actually working with SQL, which is the actual language, just like Java, PHP, and so on. Here are some of the basic SQL commands. So for example, the all caps create database is a command, and it's used to create a new or a blank database. The drop database is used to completely delete an existing database. The create table command is used to create a new table within your database, which is where you actually store your data and create fields. The drop table command is used to completely delete an existing table. And there are other commands as well, so as a practice task, look those up. But here I'm just going to focus on the basic and important SQL commands. The data manipulation, additional commands that we'll use quite frequently throughout this course. The first one is the select statement. So this command is used when you want to read or select your data. The insert command is used when you want to add or insert new data to an existing table. The update is used when you want to change or update existing data. And of course, delete is when you like to remove or delete your existing data. And there are other commands as well that you can take a look at. But here are some of the basic statements that we can use and run queries, right? For example, for the backend database. So let's jump right in. I'm going to go ahead and open the Atom editor next, and we'll create a program using PHP, and I'm going to demonstrate the SQL syntax. And in the next lesson, we'll create a database connection simply using PHP by using a program. So let's switch to our Atom editor. So once I'm in the Atom editor, next I'm going to go ahead and simply create a new file. So let's go ahead and right click on the intro folder and choose new file. Just give it any name. I'm going to call it SQL connection.php. Hit the enter key on the keyboard, and of course you'll have the blank file. Now before I actually start writing the code and open the PHP tags, for example, let's verify. You need to make sure that your local web server is running, right? So let's open the XAMPP and make sure the Apache web server is running, and then your MySQL also is running. So let's minimize this. Perfect. So let's go ahead. I'm going to first start with the PHP tag. So just open the tag, question mark, PHP, and then of course enter on my keyboard, make some spaces or extra lines for the code. And next I'm going to go ahead and start with the DB host. So just a variable, so string called DB host equals, and then set this to localhost, because I'm going to try to connect to localhost. And then I also need the port number for the MySQL. So it'll be :3306. How do I know it's 3306? Well, it's quite simple. Just navigate to your XAMPP, server, and here you see MySQL, and then the port number is 3306. So this is how I get the actual port number and see which port number MySQL is running on. So let's minimize this. So once I have the port number, I need the semicolon as part of the syntax. I'm also going to go ahead and do string connection, or CONN, equals. Here I'm going to use the MySQLi to connect, or underscore connect, to my string DB host. That's all I'm doing in this lesson, just connecting to my local host and make sure that it works. So the parameter here I used is the same variable name as my local host above. Of course, I need the semicolon. Now, once I'm done with just the basic variables, next I need to specify the if condition. So for example, if there was an error, right? So if it does not connect, then it should display something to the user. Else, right, if there is a successful connection, it should also give me the output. So I'm going to go ahead and use if and use one of these operators, the exclamation mark, for example, and then CONN, open the curly braces. In this instance, the command that we use is called die, right? And then I'm just going to go ahead and say could not connect, colon, space. Go ahead and concatenate this with the MySQLi underscore error function, and then place a semicolon. Great. So next, I'm going to go ahead and make sure my curly braces is closed. And for the successful print, I'm going to go ahead and do echo, and then connected to the database successfully, semicolon, use the MySQLi to close, and use the variable as the parameter, the CONN. Perfect. Semicolon, and that's it. So here, once I've saved the SQL connection.php file, I'm going to navigate to the web browser, refresh, and here's the SQL connection.php. So if I were to click on this, it should successfully connect to the backend database. So, or not the database at this point, just display a message saying the connection has been successfully made, right, to the local host with my SQL running at port 3306. So let's go ahead, click on the SQL connection, and perfect. So connected to the database successfully. Now, of course, some spelling errors here, so let's quickly fix those. Connected to the database successfully. Okay, so good idea to make sure your spellings are correct. So save this again. Let's go back to our browser, refresh, and perfect. Much better. Now at this point, even though we successfully connected with the local host and we echoed out or printed something like connected to the database, right? So obviously not the database at this point, only the host, even though the output is database. So this technically should be localhost successfully. How's that? Okay, so just to remove some of the confusion so far. So let's go ahead and save this, verify, go back to our code, refresh, and then now it should say it's connected to the local host successfully. Perfect, much better. Next, I'm going to demonstrate moving forward how to connect to the actual database now. So let's go back to our editor. I'm going to use the same code. So once we're connected to the local host, next, let's take a look at what additional variables and parameters that we can use to connect to a backend database. So right after the first variable DB host, I'm going to go ahead and also enter additional variables such as DB user. This is going to equal root as part of the admin. I would also need the password, so DB pass is going to equal, in this instance it's blank password. If you had one, you would enter between the single quotes, semicolon, and then of course importantly, I need to specify the actual database that I wish to connect to. So DB is going to be, let's say, DB underscore test 8 semicolon. Okay, and I can always verify by navigating back to the web server, going to my PHP myadmin, and here's the test DB8. So I already have this database with nothing in it, right? No tables, nothing, just a blank database that I wish to connect to. Likewise, you can connect to any one of the other databases as well. So in this example, I chose the test underscore DB8. So let's navigate back to our editor, and here's the same name. So make sure the name matches. So once I have defined these variables, then within my connection variable, or CONN, MySQLi underscore connect function, I also need to do comma and then re-specify all these variables. So DB user, comma, DB pass, and then finally the string DB. Great. So now I can echo out something like connected to the database successfully, or I can even further specify test underscore or DB test underscore DB underscore test 8 successfully. So save this. So once our code is complete, we are connecting to the local host. 3306 is the port number. The DB user is root, and of course I need a semicolon, just fixing up minor errors within the code as we recap the code itself. And then of course my password is blank with a semicolon, fine. The name of the database, which is DB underscore test, I think in fact it's the test underscore DB 8, and I'm going to change this within the echo print also. So test underscore DB8. Perfect. So here's the name of the database, test underscore DB8, and then of course my variable CONN is going to use the MySQL connect function with all of these parameters, the host, username, password, and the actual database name, and then display the error if I am unable to connect, or if a successful connection is made, then of course I'm going to get a print that says connected to the database test 8 successfully, and then close the connection. Perfect. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's navigate to the web browser to actually test the connection. So I'm going to navigate to the web browser, refresh, and then here's the SQL connection.php file. Let's click on it, and perfect. So it's connected to the database test underscore DB8 successfully. If I were to navigate to the backend PHP myadmin, here's the test underscore DB8. So now we're actually connected to this database. So hope this helps. Practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to create a database using MySQL within PHP. So let's jump right in. Within the Atom editor, I'm going to go ahead and simply create a new file. So right click on the intro folder, click on new file, just give it any name. I'm going to start and use the SQL naming convention. So we differentiate all of this code, or all of these files basically, which are SQL and which belong to PHP. So anything that starts with SQL will become part of the SQL lessons. So just a naming convention. So it's SQL and then new database dot PHP. Enter. Perfect. Let's begin with our code. Open the PHP tag. So question mark PHP, and of course enter a few lines for the code itself. Let's go ahead and declare our variables. So this will be DB host, for example. Now I could just copy it from the last exercise that we did, okay, or you could just type it all over again. So it's better to just type it. It's good practice for you guys. So it's DB host equals, and then of course my local host, because first I need to create a connection, right, to the backend SQL, and then I'm going to go ahead and use the create command to create the database later on. So the host is at port 3306 semicolon. Next is my DB user. So using the same naming convention, so it's easier for you to follow. And DB user is going to be root semicolon. Next is the string DB pass, and this is going to be blank semicolon. And then one more, or a couple of more, I need the actual DB also. So let's first connect to, let's say, test DB8. That's the one that we created in the previous lesson, right? So once we're done with this, let's go ahead and open the connection, or use the connection variable. And I'm going to use MySQL underscore connect, and then DB host, string DB host as the first parameter. Next parameter is going to be the DB user. Third is going to be the DB password, and then fourth the DB itself. Semicolon. Let's go ahead and do the if statement. So if exclamation mark string conn variable, open the curly braces, and use the die function. This is similar to the exit function, okay? So either or, whichever you're comfortable with. So I'm going to go ahead and do could not connect colon with a space, and then simply concatenate this with the MySQL underscore error. Perfect. And that's a function. So make sure I have a semicolon. Once I'm done, close the curly braces, echo out certain details. So I'm going to go ahead and do echo and simply say connected successfully. So I just have connected successfully. Make sure my spelling for the word echo is correct. Perfect. And then I'll also use the semicolon at the end. And let's go ahead and do MySQL, close, and then of course the string conn variable, semicolon. Perfect. So at this point, pretty straightforward, something exactly what we did in the previous lesson. Now moving forward, let's go ahead and create a variable called SQL, for instance, string SQL, and here I'm going to use the command. So the command is called create database, and then of course the name of the new database that I wish to create. So I'm going to go ahead and call it test underscore DB, let's say 13, and then semicolon, get my another variable, something like return value or ret value. So this variable will contain the SQL parameters. So starting with MySQL underscore query this time, and then simply use the SQL with a semicolon. Perfect. So this will create the new database called testdb13. Now next, of course, I still need to once again do the error or connected successfully echo out messages. So here I'm just going to go copy this. This is my error part for the ret value, not the conn at this point, right? So just saving some time. So this is for the return value variable. It's going to say the same thing, could not connect, right? MySQL error, perfect. Once I'm done with this, I'm going to go ahead and close the curly braces, and then simply echo out the successful message. So database test underscore db13 has been successfully created. Perfect. Semicolon. And close my PHP tag. Perfect. So in this code so far, half of the code is the same as our connection to the backend database and to a certain particular database. But importantly, this is what actually creates the new database called testdb13. So let's go ahead and save this. So Control S, and let's navigate to the web browser. Refresh so that we get our current list of all the PHP files. And the name of this file was SQL new database.php. So if I were to click on this, for example, the code is going to execute and the message is displayed, connected successfully. Database test db13 has been successfully created. Perfect. Let's verify by going to the backend phpMyAdmin. Let's reload or refresh, and here we go. We have our new database called test_db13. Obviously no tables and nothing in it. So this way you can create code, use the MySQL within PHP, and then create your own database. So hope this helps practice, and let's move to the next lesson. Welcome back. In this lesson I'm going to demonstrate how to create a table within an existing database or in your backend database using SQL within PHP. So let's jump right in. In the previous lesson we created the new database. Here I'm going to create a table using the create table command and then providing different field names as well as their types. So let's go ahead and first create a new file. So right click on the intro folder, choose new file, just give it any name. I'm going to call SQL new table.php. Enter. Perfect. Now to save time, I'm just going to go ahead and copy the code from one of the previous examples. So I'm going to go and connect to the SQL new database. That's the one that we used earlier. So just copy the code here, the entire code, and I'll delete what's not required. So Control C for copy, go to our new file and paste it. And here I'm just going to delete out things that I do not require. So for example, I would need all the variables. I need to connect to the actual host and then the database and of course all the variables. Here, this is something that I don't really require at this point. So I'm going to delete this part as long as I'm okay with this, right? You can type it if you like, you can recode it. Rather, it's a good practice for you guys to actually go ahead and redo each of these files. It's just great practice. And the more you do it, it's easier it'll be for you once we get to our e-commerce site development. Alright, so here I have the basic connection to my host and a database, right, that I selected already called testdb8 in this instance. And then simple use a condition. If it's connected, it's going to display a message. If not, it's going to give me an error. So right after the MySQL close the connection variable here, I'm going to go ahead and do string SQL equals, and then of course my create table is the command I'm looking for. And after I use the actual command called create table, I need the name of the table itself. In other words, the new table that I'm creating, I would like to have or give it a name. So it could be any name. I'm going to call it employees 5, for example. And then right after employees 5, I need to open the parentheses. And then of course I need the concatenation here and specify next. I'm going to go ahead and start specifying my fields. So the first field is going to be, for example, employee ID. That's the first field that I have to specify. And here the field is int. In other words, it's an integer type field. So only data or values can be entered in this field, no text. And I'm going to specify not null. In other words, you must enter an employee ID. You cannot leave it blank. I can also say something like auto underscore increment. And what this will do is, of course, straightforward. It's going to automatically increment the next employee ID. That's straightforward. Comma. And right after comma, I'm going to go ahead and close the single quotes and then use the concatenate again. And next field is going to be the employee name. So EMP name, I'm just using these naming conventions, right? And trying to indent so we stay in the same line. So EMP underscore name is going to be a varchar, and that's again a data type, variable or character. The 20 characters is the length, the maximum length of this particular field. And I will also specify this to be not null. Perfect. So put a comma and then a space, that's the syntax, a dot, concatenate this again, and next I'm going to go ahead and use the EMP underscore address. This is going to be the same data type as above, so VAR, CHAR, and the length is going to be 20 in this case as well, and also not null. Comma with a space, and then of course let's go ahead and do another one. So here I'm going to use the employee salary, so EMP underscore salary, just making these fields up, right? You can of course try on your own and create your own types of fields. So employee salary is going to be INT and not null, same thing, comma, and then of course concatenate this again. And next I'm going to define the primary key. So this is primary key, and then set this primary key to for the EMP underscore ID, which is the first field that I created. And the primary key, if you're familiar with the relational database management, right, systems, is that it's a unique identifier. So within this table called employees 5, the primary key for the employee ID is going to be unique. In other words, you cannot duplicate employee ID field. Great. So once I have the employee ID, let's close the parentheses, and let's go ahead and fix up the syntax here. So employee ID, I need the single quote to be ended, and then of course I need the semicolon. Perfect. So once I have this, next I'm going to go ahead and first scroll down so you can actually see, enter some spaces. Next I'm going to go ahead and do the MySQL underscore select underscore DB, and then the database that I wish to choose is called test, let's say underscore DB13, something that I created earlier. And then once I select this database, I put a semicolon, get a variable called return value or return VAL, for example, and this is going to equal MySQL underscore query for the parameter called SQL, semicolon, and then of course my standard condition if I get an error, right, or echo out the success message. So I'm just going to copy this from the top here, copy it, perfect, same error, close the curly braces, and finally do the echo and echo out, let's say, table employees 5 has been successfully created. Perfect. Semicolon, and make sure my PHP tag is closed. Get rid of this. Perfect. Now I can see that my color coding has changed. This is supposed to be in red, right? So the PHP tag. Let's scroll up. So it begins fine, but somewhere in the middle or somewhere within my code, there is certain syntax that it's not recognized. So I need to figure out what that error is so my color coding remains correct and I'll be able to run this code. So first let me go ahead and save this, and then let's verify what happened with our code. So within my create table employees 5, I need to get rid of this apostrophe. Perfect. And now it's looking better. Let's scroll down to see our closing PHP tag has changed color. Now it's red. Great. So this was the only syntax so far. So next, I'm going to go ahead and simply save it again and then execute it and take a look at whether employees 5 has been successfully created or not. So let's navigate to our web browser, refresh, and here's the SQL new table.php file. Let me go ahead and click on it. Okay, line 21, syntax error, unexpected set of parentheses. So let's go back to our code, check line 21, and it's just one too many parentheses. And of course, this quotation or single quote goes outside the employee ID. Perfect. And then of course I semicolon. I also need to correct the spelling here for the word select, right? So this is select and it changes the color to blue. Perfect. Just some minor syntax, right? So let's save it again, Control S. Let's navigate back to our browser. I'm going to refresh the SQL new table.php, and if it works, it's going to give me the connected successfully table employees 5 has been successfully created. Awesome. Let's verify by going to the backend database and then taking a look at within testDB 13. If I click on it, you'll notice that employees 5 now exists. If I click on employees 5 table, it's going to have all of those fields that I just created. So in order to take a look at those fields, you have to navigate to the structure tab. So if you click on structure, it's going to give you a list of all the fields. Perfect. We have the employee ID, employee name, employee address, and then employee salary. So this way you can use the SQL within PHP to create a table within a database. And we'll be using this once we get to our shopping cart. We'll be creating brands, for example, the modals, entering products, and so on. And everything will be done through SQL queries, just similar to what we just did in this lesson. So practice with this, and let's move to the next lesson. In this lesson, moving forward, I'm going to demonstrate how to fetch data from your tables or your database using SQL within PHP. So let's jump right in. Let's go ahead and first create a new file. So right click on the intro folder, choose new file, give it a name. I'm going to call it SQL fetch data.php. Hit the enter key, and of course we get a blank file. So I'm going to go ahead and first create a connection to the local host, to the DB itself, and then execute the SQL command. So to save time, just pick any of the existing file that we did in the previous lesson, for example, such as SQL new table. We are going to use the same DB so we stay consistent. So just copy all the code here and paste it into the new file. And of course we need to delete the create table so that we may create our new SQL query. So I'm going to go ahead and in fact delete all of this so we don't get confused, and only leave the part where it says connect to the local host and to the DB, and of course errors if I cannot connect, or success message if I connect successfully. Perfect. So right after the MySQL close the connection, right, I need to go ahead and do the string SQL equals, and here I'm going to use the select SQL syntax, and then I'm selecting from, let's say, the employee ID, and these are the same fields that we created in the previous lesson within the existing table. But let's just take a look at the table one more time, and then we'll come back to this code. So I'm going to navigate to the backend PHP MyAdmin so you could actually see. Here's our web server. Let's go to our PHP MyAdmin. And notice within my test underscore db13, there's a table called employees 5. And within the employees 5 table, if I navigate to the structure of the table, it has certain fields such as employee ID, employee name, address, and then salary. So now we know which database and the table name as well. So here's the database one more time, test underscore db13, and then the table name is employees 5 within the backend database. Let's switch to our code. So here I'm going to execute a query using the select statement of SQL, and I'm selecting first the fields. So the first field is employee ID, comma, and then employee name. And the good thing about the editor is that it populates as soon as you type something, right? So it knows that you are going to use the field. So employee name, and then I have the employee salary. And if you're not sure about these names, you can always go back to the PHP backend and then verify whether you're using the correct names or not. And that's important. The name that you specify here in the select statement must match with your actual name in the backend database. So after employee name, I have the employee salary. Perfect. So let's say these 3 fields I need to select and then specify from the table, right? So this is employees 5 table, semicolon, run the MySQL, select DB, perfect, and then of course the name of the DB is test underscore DB13, semicolon. Once I have this, I'm going to set my variable, so return val, for example, equals MySQL underscore query, perfect, and then specify the parameters as SQL, semicolon. Great. Next, of course, I need to do the if exclamation mark string return val, for instance, open the curly braces. Let's go ahead and do the die, for example, and then do could not connect. Same thing. We've done this several times before. Or let's say could not get the data, because we are going to fetch data from the existing table. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the colon and a space, for example, and then concatenate this with MySQL error. Choose from the list here, and that's a function, semicolon, close the curly braces. Perfect. Let me go ahead and enter some few lines. Now once I have this, this is the first part, so to speak, where I've just selected the fields called employee ID, employee name, employee salary from the employees 5 table. And then next I need to specify, right? I need to fetch data also. This is just the selected part. I've just selected the table, but now I need to run another command that is going to go ahead and fetch the data. So let's go ahead and let's do a while here. So while, get a variable, let's say row equals, and the SQL statement is MySQL underscore fetch, and then if it's an associated array I can use that, so I'm going to use my fetch array, and let's go ahead and do parentheses, and here just specify the actual parameters. So this is going to be retval, and then I'm also going to do and say MySQL underscore ASSOC, and that is going to do the fetching. Now once I'm done with this, open the curly braces, and next do the printouts, right? So I need to specify the echo, for example. And what am I echoing here is the EMP ID, for example, and this is going to be containing the string row, and then the array itself, which is EMP ID underscore ID, which is fine. And then after ID, I need to close the curly braces. Perfect. Now I can also provide a break, so I can use a simple BR tag within this, okay, so that it's easier to use the HTML as well. And concatenate this now next with, let's say, I'm going to go ahead and use the EMP name and do the same thing. Specify the string row, and then of course within the array I'm going to use the EMP underscore name. Great. Same thing, or close the curly braces after the brackets, and then specify the break tag. Perfect. Once I have the break tag for this, next I'm going to go ahead and concatenate again and also bring in the employee salary. So EMP salary, for example, colon, and this thing is going to use the curly braces, string row. And by the way, I need to fix up quickly up here. These are all curly braces. Perfect. Great. So for the row employee salary, I need the employee salary for the array also after row. So let's go ahead and do EMP underscore salary, and then my bracket is closed, my curly braces are closed, and I also need to specify a break. So let's go ahead and do that. Perfect. And then concatenate this with just something like a bunch of lines, right? That's all. You don't have to, but you can if you need to. Semicolon to make things look nicer, basically. Let me go ahead and fix up the syntax, get rid of the space here, make sure my indentation is okay. Perfect. And once that's done, close the curly braces and echo out the results, such as fetched data successfully, and then semicolon. Perfect. And make sure my PHP tag is closed at the bottom. Great. So here, just using the SQL fetch array and just fetching data from all of these fields from the employees 5 table. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Once it's saved, let's navigate to our web server. Let's go ahead, refresh, and here's the file name called SQL fetch data.php. If I click on it, it's going to go ahead and execute the code. It's going to say connected successfully, fetched data successfully. Well, wait a minute here. Where's the actual data? I don't see anything, right? I don't see the employee ID. I don't see the name. I don't see the salary. Okay, so not to worry, because here's why. We don't have data in the table, guys. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's check it out. So let's go to our backend database, and here is the test DB13. Fine. My employees 5 table is wonderful. Let's go to structure, which is perfect. Now if I were to go, let's say, to employee ID field, or the employee name, or the address, or the salary, I need to go ahead and do the insert, right? So I need to have some data just so that you can actually see the output once I run again. So I'm going to go ahead and click on insert, for example, and here's the employee ID. I'm going to give it a value of, let's say, 1. The employee name, I'm going to go ahead and say it's John. The address could be 198 Greenfield Avenue, for example, and the employee salary could be 6 figures. How about 125,000? Great. And click go, and this will simply create and populate this piece of information within the employee ID, name, address, and then salary fields. So let's click go, and what this does, it says 1 row inserted. And if you notice on the bottom, the backend PHP MyAdmin also shows you the actual insert SQL command that it used to in fact enter the data. So the command is insert into employees 5 table, and then of course all of these fields with values 1 John, 198 Greenfield Avenue, and 125,000 with a semicolon. So this way you can actually take a look at and work with the SQL syntax and commands directly from PHP MyAdmin backend database. And here are the basic commands one more time: the select everything or asterisk, select itself, insert, update, delete, basic commands. So once we have inserted the data, let's navigate back to our actual code, which is right here, same code. Now if I were to run this again and see the output, it's going to fetch the output for all of these fields. So let's go to our web server, click on this tab, let's refresh, run the PHP file again, and perfect, we have connected successfully. Employee ID is 1, employee name is John, and employee salary is 125,000 with a message that says fetched data successfully. So if you had a bunch of records, it will display all of those records. So once I have the results, basically I can take a look at what needs to be fixed. So for example, there's a set of parentheses right before the EMP name, and EMP salary is not required really. So let's get back to our code, go to Atom Editor here, and within the string here, let me just get rid of this. After the break, I don't need the parentheses. Perfect. So just the break itself is fine. So all we're doing here is the employee ID, bringing in the row variable for the employee ID, set this in the array, and then break. Concatenate this with the next field, and so on. And at the end, just draw a line or any other type of symbols, or you don't have to use this at all. So let's save this one more time. Let's navigate back to our web browser, refresh, run the query again to fetch data, basically SQL fetch, and this time it's perfect. So connected successfully, EMP ID, EMP name is John, EMP salary is 125,000. Of course, you can always put a break after connected successfully, or enter a new line so that the EMP ID also moves a notch down. So that's a practice task for you right there. Go ahead, edit the code, and make sure the employee ID is moved down. So with this, let's move to the next lesson.
So in this lesson, we will learn how to create a new free web host. So let's move forward. I would recommend you to go to claydesk.runhosting.com, and on this site you can easily make a new and free web host. So to make a free web host, you'll scroll down and choose the free hosting plan. Click sign up, and it will redirect you to the page where you could fill in your login details and make your free account. So we'll choose ClayDesk free hosting plan, scroll down and click continue. Now it will take you to the page where you have to fill in your login details. So you'll write in your first name, mine is Saeed, and last name Ali, and your company, I'll write in ClayDesk, and then your email address, I'll type in my email address, and then password. After typing in our password, we have to write our address. I'll write my address, and then my city, which is Piscataway, and then my state. And then we need to write our zip code as well. And after that we need to choose our country. So after choosing a country, it's an optional field if you need to write your phone number. If you don't have a phone, you can leave this field blank. So then we'll agree with the following agreement. Then we'll check this box which says yes, I agree with the following agreements, and write in the CAPTCHA, and then click continue. And it will process our request and send a confirmation email to our email address. So basically it says, congratulations, your web hosting account has been created successfully. Click here to log in. It is ready for you to explore it. So we'll click here and it will take us to the login page. But first we need to verify our email. So we will open up our email address and then we'll verify our account. So this is the confirmation email and this is the login details. So we'll click on email confirmation, and to activate our account we'll click this link. Now as you can see, our account has been verified. Now we need to enter our email address and then our password and hit login, and it will take you to your main dashboard. So in this lesson we learned how to make a new free web host. Now it's your turn to sign up for your free hosting plan, or you could also take your personal plan if you want to create multiple databases.